Aditya, you saw Prime Minister Modi there at the G20 summit. Tell us how he came out of literally nowhere. No one had an idea of what he stood for in foreign policy. In 2014, as late as 2014, a few weeks before the swearing in, everyone was asking, what is his vision for the world? Is it going to be one of revenge because he was denied a visa to the United States? And exactly the opposite happened.
In fact, in the last 10 years, now that I look back, and I've covered quite a few national security and foreign affairs aspects, I see quite a few events that have happened out of nowhere.
Yes.
And nobody could have guessed it, really. I was there at the Bharat Mandapam when G20 summit happened, and I was interacting with a lot of European, particularly European, commentators and foreign policy experts. And all these wonks had this idea that there will be no consensus. They had almost drafted their editorials stating that it has led to yet another failure.
Right.
And India, under India's presidency. And it was shocking really for them to digest this fact that suddenly Prime Minister appeared in this 2-minute speech.
And on day one.
On day one. And stating that within a few hours we have a consensus.
Yes.
And that is for the world to see. But the larger point here, Sandeep, that I want to also discuss between India and China on the global south aspect is the rules-based order.
Yeah.
And this is the world not recognizing China for adopting or accepting or going by the principles of rules-based order. Right. Look at the ties that Canada has with China.
Yes.
And there's a diplomatic standoff, there is espionage that is continuously happening, Chinese police stations really stationed in Canada. Look at the ties that Australia and China have on the other hand. So there are similar other countries that have called out this kind of attitude that China has. Look at the situation in South China Sea continuously, and then adopting the same kind of mechanism and threats and hegemony towards Sri Lanka, India, in the Indian Ocean region, sending spy ships.
Right.
So this has been called out, and the larger aspect here is the trust factor. When India and China, yes, you can compare and say that Chinese are far ahead in economy and we have to catch up. That's a reality, that's a fact that we have to digest. But when you spark this debate throughout the world, that who do you trust? Who believes in the international rules-based order? Who believes in not an era of war, but have a global peace catalyst? Let's believe in Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam.
Right.
That's where India takes the center stage.
And China is the naughty boy in the room.
And can I just add to what he's saying? Aditya is absolutely right. That the fact that China is practically a dictatorship, and we pride ourselves on being the largest democracy in the world. We've been recognized as such, and of course Aditya is right in pointing out that increasingly countries, not just the US but many others, are looking at India as a countervailing force against China in the Indo-Pacific, which is probably the primary reason why you have these countries rolling out the red carpet for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, from the United States to France. They're all wooing India because they do see India as a very important player to protect their own interests and the interests of many other countries in the Indo-Pacific against China. But the geopolitical aspect apart, you touched, Aditya, on the economic aspect. Yes, nobody can deny that the Chinese economy is 5 times the size of the Indian economy. We have a long way to go as far as catching up with China is concerned. But again, the world has learned some very important lessons in the last few years, again to India's advantage. During the COVID pandemic, and thanks to the Russia-Ukraine war, we saw a disruption of global supply chains. And that has also led to, I would say, a golden opportunity for India emerging as a viable alternative. There's been so much talk about how India has the potential to be the next factory of the world, that China is the manufacturing hub, there is no doubt about that. But increasingly, because of the trust factors that Aditya referred to, and because we've seen global supply chain disruptions over the last few years, there are many who would rather invest in India, would rather shift their manufacturing locations from China to India, because this is seen as not just a democracy but a far more stable environment.
Absolutely, and that's where the expression China plus one emerged. But Kartikeya, what has been Prime Minister Modi's unique take on foreign policy that has actually held us in such good stead in the last decade?
I think there are a couple of things which makes his foreign policy different from his predecessor. One is focus on cultural nationalism, that India has ancient. It has got an ancient past. It's a old nation in a new country. So we must pride ourselves in our ancient values. So that is why you find him using words like Vishwaguru, Vishwamatri, Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. That's one. Secondly, his focus on the cultural connect. Everyone knows before advent of Islam, you had great influence of Hindu thought in Southeast Asia. It was known as the Sea of Champa, the South China Sea. Those words were there. So, like for example, when he was in Indonesia, he spoke about the Ramayana circuit, or when he is in the other parts of Southeast Asia, there is a stress on the Buddhist circuit. That's second. Third, I think he made a very strong effort to connect the diaspora. The only leader who connected with diaspora was before independence, and that was when Jawaharlal Nehru was sent by Mahatma Gandhi to Europe to canvass for India's freedom. That was the last time, or to say, though Vivekanand Chicago's address is important, but that was India's message to the world in context of Hinduism, but not in context of this muscle of the diaspora. So that's the third important part. The diaspora rallies are they're not just optics, but it's creating muscle throughout, because these are pressure groups. And the fourth thing is that he has been exceptionally prudent. A lot of times he gets lost in the word like beacon of democracy, beacon of the space. There was a very famous operation which the naval commandos did, and the princes had to go back. A lot of people wrote, but then what happened ultimately? It stood us in, it helped us in multiple ways. Immensely, because that was one-to-one relationship which he forged. People can make fun of him.
And
democracy.
Don't forget bringing back all our students stuck in Ukraine, or
I think that policy is the biggest of the wins that Modi has had, because it's not just about students, it's not just about diaspora, it's not just about the stranded Indians. It's about helping the last Indian standing or stuck outside. And Modi, Jaishankar and Doval, all three together have positioned themselves in a certain way and ensured that this is going to happen. You have numerous examples from Afghanistan during the Taliban takeover. You have the most recent example of Qatar, the unthinkable, people on death sentence, 8 former naval, officers of India, who everyone had almost given up. Their families were not almost interacting with the media, and people were saying that this is a gone case, unfortunately.
Absolutely.
And suddenly, there is diplomacy happening across the Middle East.
Quite diplomacy.
Multiple visits.
Beyond, far away from the cameras.
I think the last part is most important. I know Emmy is not going to react to it. And, it is India's ability to deal with people of interest opposed to us. From Canada to United States of America to Australia. I think that message has gone hard and clear to them. And that it is for this reason, for past 2 months, there are no pro-Khalistani rallies in Toronto or Melbourne or Manhattan or SFO. It's just disappeared. I know there will be denial, but I think the message has gone loud and clear that we will get you.
Two important things that I also want to mention that have happened in the last few years is India's West Asia diplomacy. How West Asia is more inclined to be with India than any other Muslim country in the neighborhood. This is a very important fact. You had a situation where we had Article 370 abrogation, and Pakistan went to the OIC and several other forums and expected the Muslim world to rebel and rise against India. That didn't happen.
None of that happened.
UAE, Maldives, Saudi Arabia are not just investing in Kashmir, but at that time stood with India and said, it's an internal matter.
It's a very important
I think that was a bold decision to have a Sunni alignment, because earlier in 70s and 60s the alignment was more towards the Shia side. This shift is very prominent. I don't know how will it bear result, but this is pretty prominent. We have aligned with the Sunni world.
We have, but we are still very good friends with the Shia bloc as well. I mean, given the fact that we are the third largest Shia population.
Iran does not like Quad. I'm
sure but we are friends with everyone. We are friends with Israel. We are friends with Saudi Arabia. We are friends with Iran.
Running with the hare and hunting with the hound. I think India has come to exemplify it. If you're talking about the ongoing Israel-Hamas war, if there's one country the Palestinians trust, it is India. If there's
Yes.
one country that Israelis refer to as friends of themselves, it is India.
Yes.
If you talk about Russia-Ukraine war, it's a war that split the world down the middle.
Right.
Most of the world took a very harsh anti-Russia, anti-Putin stance.
Yes. Right.
And even in that situation, you had Prime Minister Narendra Modi making one phone call after another,
Yes.
receiving one phone call after another from President Zelensky, President Putin. There, of course, that famous statement, this is not an era of war.
Right.
And many leaders, including President Biden, no less, acknowledging
Yeah.
that there is room for India to act as peacemaker.
Absolutely.
You
And
know?
one big reason to watch out for the News9 Global Business Summit is the fact that two very key people that we've been talking about who've literally shaped our foreign policy in the last decade. It's Prime Minister Modi and Foreign Minister S. Jaishankar are going to be there, and we're all going to be eagerly looking forward to what they're going to be saying there. Aditya, what are your thoughts? What would the Prime Minister talk about at
you
our
said
summit?
it, Sandeep. It's the best, it's the biggest, and it's only going grander. This is the second edition of What India Thinks Today conclave. We were there for the last conclave where we had the David Cameron, who was the former Prime Minister and now the Foreign Minister.
And the Foreign
in
Minister,
UK.
yeah, exactly. Look how
And
politics changes in 2 years.
Yes, we had the UNGA President Abdullah Shahid. We
Yes.
had range of speakers from the Indian politics, from cabinet ministers and several others. And this time around, we'll have the former Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott giving the global keynote speech. We'll have Prime Minister Narendra Modi, External Affairs Minister Jaishankar speaking on Global South and different aspects that have shaped India's foreign policy. And we'll have a range of speakers, India's soft power, personalities from sports, from cinema, and then we'll have, of course, people from politics, from external affairs aspect, and a lot of key speakers who have represented India in different fields.
You know, the important aspect is that at least in context of Global South, with Modi there will be continuity.
Yes.
Most of the Democrats or the leaders in democracies, either they're losing elections, they're not coming back. The people who are staying in power are all autocrats. You have North Koreans, you have Russians, you have Chinese,
Iranians, the Chinese.
Iranians, you have the Syrian administration, or you have those autocratic West Asian countries. If you look at democracies, I don't think, I really don't know about Biden, you know. I have no idea about how people will vote for Sunak. So it's a different thing. But as we know,
Actually, Sunak is on really sticky wicket.
Yes,
Sticky wicket,
yes.
but
the Labour,
as of now,
the Labour Party looks like
as
it's
of
coming
now,
back.
there's a
It's-
continuity.
Yes.
And continuity has its benefits.
Right.
In hindsight, Modi will be one of the few leaders to have dealt with separate US administrations.
Yeah.
It gives a deep understanding. He would understand a different Xi Jinping because he has gone through Wuhan and Mamallapuram.
Yes.
Those two experiences.
And he's been in Ladakh.
Yes.
And-
And he has been dealing with the Russians.
Yes.
So for the Global South, we will have a man next 5 years because he's all set to win.
Yes.
It's a
Well,
matter
can
of
I
number.
remind you what the PM said over the weekend? Even other governments know, Aayega to Modi hi, because they're already sending me invites.
Absolutely.
So that's
Yeah,
going to
that
be an
I-
important aspect for Global
In,
South
yeah.
because he's going to be
He's
there.
booked all of this year, 2024. So it's like
The
very
invites
clear
are
that
pouring in.
Yeah, the invites are pouring in. The world knows that Prime Minister Modi is going to be there
Absolutely.
in 2024. And I'd like to thank my colleagues Kartikeya Sharma, Aditya Raj Kaul, and Neha Khanna for joining us in this very exciting countdown to the TV9 Global Summit. India poised for the next big leap. Thanks for watching.